hello and welcome to all of our Gold Learning viewers. I'm Fiona Langsharp, IBCLC Director of Communications and MC here at Gold Learning. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to have you back here at Gold Learning. And of course, we're going to be talking about Gold Perinatal today. You can see it on your screen. You better check in right now because I'm very excited. We've got Dr. Sarah Buckley here with us today. And of course, she's going to be with us coming up here very soon at our Gold Perinatal Conference. She is our opening keynote speaker. Can you believe that? It's been a few years. We're going to talk to Sarah just in a moment here and chat about what she's been doing and since she spoke for us last. But I want to make sure that you have all the details so that you can register for this event. So Sarah's actually going to be with us. She's going to be joining us live for most of you on October 1st. Now, I say that because, of course, with Sarah, it's going to be moving into a different time zone, and I want to be sure that everyone goes to the website. So if you want to join us, make sure that you've got the right day, the right time, and so go to the website. It'll actually log you into your local time zone, so it's very, very convenient. You can go to www.goldperinatal.com and log in to the Gold Perinatal Conference. This is going to be a free and open access event, so there's absolutely no excuses. And I know, Dr. Sarah Buckley, you are very excited about this, right? This is something
it's fantastic. It's great. I love that we can have people all around the world listening at the same time. We can have discussions, and, it's a great opportunity really to form a community around looking at physiological labour and birth, looking at perinatal interventions as well, and really getting good information out there. So thank you for the opportunity, Fiona.
Oh no, I am so excited, and I mean, I remember, Sarah, the first time that you came, and of course we were just having a little gush over all the work that you've done over the years and how much we actually use it in practice, and how much we've used it in our own practices, but how many times we can refer people to the work that you've done. But I mean, you're one of the people that I know is very humble. You talk about the collaboration that you've done over the years, all the people that have mentored you over the years, and so it's just been a fantastic journey for you. We've watched you for many years, grow and inspire others to do what you do. So it's just been great. But I wanted to jump in, Sarah, if you don't mind. I want to hear what's been happening in the backstory of Dr. Sarah Buckley, because I know you have been busy, but I haven't heard from you a while. I haven't seen what you've been doing. I need to catch up and see what's been happening. So why don't you tell me a little bit, how's the family, first of all? How are they all doing?
Yeah, so my 4 children are now 19 to 28 and all happy, healthy adults. So far, so good. Actually, the youngest one left home at the start of the year, which was a little bit of a shock. So we're an empty nest. But of course, everything brings opportunities as well, doesn't it? So I've got more opportunities to travel. Yeah, and I'm also fortunate because I started doing a PhD a few years ago, and it's really given me lots of opportunities to immerse myself in my studies. Currently, right now, actually, I'm doing some coursework in biostatistics, which requires a lot of immersion. But outside of that, what happened in 2015 when I spoke was my report, Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing, came out. And one of the real take-home messages from that report is how much we don't know about physiological birth and the impacts of intervention. So that's really my intention with the PhD, is to start to fill in some of those gaps. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work with a team of EU colleagues over the last 3 years. We've been working on systematic reviews on oxytocin, and especially my colleague, Professor Kirsten Uvnas-Moberg, many of you might know her or heard her talk, who's the worldwide expert on oxytocin and childbirth. So we've been having a very good time together. And our paper on maternal oxytocin levels and physiological birth has just come out. And BMC pregnancy and childbirth is open access, so you can go and read that. Some of what I'll be talking about actually in the keynote comes from that paper as well. We're also looking at one we've got, it's being reviewed at the moment, is oxytocin levels during breastfeeding in relation to interventions that happened in labour and birth. Like, how could labour and birth interventions impact breastfeeding? Could it be via changes in oxytocin levels? And then the third paper that we're in the middle of is oxytocin levels in birth with intervention. So it's really about getting all the data that we have available, doing a systematic review and writing something that's very authoritative and that's published in peer-reviewed journals, not just for midwives and women, but also that'll come to the attention of our obstetric colleagues as well, because this is critical information, like how are interventions impacting particularly the oxytocin system, but how are they impacting mothers and babies? And there's actually a lot of misunderstandings out there around that. So yeah, the other things I've been doing is writing blogs about that. I've just written a blog about synthetic oxytocin myths and side effects. So that's on my website, sarahbuckley.com.
Where I might say there are lots of resources as well. We can give you a good plug for that, Sarah. Don't be shy, folks, and head on over to Sarah's website, which is absolutely amazing. Sarah, how long has it been since you put out your very first book?
Yes, well, I actually self-published the first version of my book, Gentle Birth, Gentle
Online.
Mothering, back in
Yeah, online, yeah.
back in 2005. That's right. Yeah, but actually the first thing I wrote in this area was an article I wrote for a US magazine called Mothering Magazine back in 2002, and that
Mothering.
was yeah, I know, it was a fantastic magazine, but put together by a brilliant woman called Peggy O'Mara, who's still got
Yeah.
some excellent stuff online. But the article was called Ecstatic Birth: Nature's Hormonal Blueprint for Labor, and actually
Yes.
that's still an ebook that I give away on my website, and it's really a nice summary of everything we're talking about. And I've kind of built on that. I wrote chapters in my books on that, and really the report has been like the biggest expansion of that work as well. And then of course that's led into a PhD, so it's got kind of bigger and bigger as time has progressed. But I mean, it's an endlessly fascinating topic because it is, now, as I call it, Mother Nature's superb design, how our bodies are designed to work. And it's not just, as I'll be talking about labor and birth, but it's really about that wider expansion of childbearing, which includes what happens afterwards, how labor and birth and the processes in there actually optimize individual survival, species survival, by optimizing
Right.
also breastfeeding and attachment. So that's, a big perspective that I share in my work. I'll be talking about in the keynote as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that this is an area that still fascinates me. I got to meet up with Kirsten again this year in the UK, and she was talking about this at a conference with me, and it really is quite fascinating. Is the more we learn, the less we know, and back and forth. There's a lot of stretching happening in this area, I feel, once again, as people sort of push forward with more collective types of research that we just haven't reviewed for some time, or there's new data available. So it's very interesting to me that we're seeing sort of a resurgence in people asking questions, and not just the researchers, not just people like you and I, and lots of the people that will be coming to this conference, but the consumer. Yes, the consumer is asking questions, which is really what we've always wanted. If the mothers and the parents are asking questions about this is going to drive it further forward, which is very, very exciting to me. Is that something that you can relate to as well, Sarah?
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, it's all about making informed choices for yourself and your
Mm-hmm.
baby, and having the best information that's available. And as I said, and what we found in the report was that there's a lot of places where there are big gaps. And it's interesting because what you say, because some of those gaps are currently being filled. In fact, one of the areas I was going to study in my PhD was the impact of synthetic oxytocin on breastfeeding, which has been a big gap, but now
Sure.
that gap is actually getting filled by researchers. So I think there is quite a drive to look at this stuff and publish high quality research on it. It's quite exciting after talking about these things for decades actually, and then seeing the gaps being filled in.
Yeah.
I mean, in particularly in the hormonal area, but exactly as you say, the more we know, the less we know really, the more we realize how much we don't know and how complex these systems are, and especially the interactions between these systems, because we've taken this kind of reductionist scientific model of looking at one thing, but really, especially in relation to childbirth, it's such a complex interrelated system, and to appreciate how one small change might interact other changes, we really, some of that there's big gaps in our knowledge there as well.
Yeah, and I think you also mentioned it too. We've been quite short-sighted, in terms of the role of, the hormones in birth and not looking at the big picture. And that's what we're starting to see too, which is very exciting because the things that we're doing now have long-term consequences, and I can see that, obviously that's one of the words that you're using in your presentation, but it is really mind-boggling that, we can't just be dismissive of this anymore. We really need to pay attention. This could have, and some of us know this has a generational impact long term. We've seen this in smaller studies. Now it's getting blown up again, and and it is kind of exciting because it means that we can make better choices, even if we had to choose a certain type of birth that included, shifting hormones, Pitocin, all those types of things. But it just gives us better choices, if we have to go into a certain type of situation. But I'm sure that that's something that, that probably excites you a little bit too, is that we can, we're looking at the long-term impact now and not just short-term.
Yes, and there's a lot of models for looking at that. And one of the things that's happened in the last few years is the interest in the microbiome. And I think what's brilliant about that is it really gives us a way of looking at possible long-term consequences, and it really opens up that possibility that what happens in the perinatal period could have long-term consequences. And one of the ways that I frame it in my work is I talk about hormonal gaps. Sometimes interventions are necessary, but they create hormonal gaps. And what can we do to address that hormonal gap? And we could use that, we could talk about the microbiome in that way, like when a baby's born by cesarean, there's a microbiome gap. The baby isn't getting the seeding of their gastrointestinal tract, the whole body actually, in the way that would happen with a vaginal birth. And we're starting to think, well, that could have long-term consequences. So, the big question, and again, I asked this in the keynote, and we can't answer it right now, is what might be the long-term consequences of these hormonal gaps. And we haven't studied them, and, it's a bit like what Michelle O'Don says. The important thing is we're starting to ask the question. So I think things are changing and evolving, and I think in some ways the microbiome material has been really helpful. The perspective has been really, really helpful in relation to hormones, because we're starting to ask those questions or to conceive that there could be long-term consequences of things that happen in the perinatal period.
Yeah, I think that the shift in the microbiome has been really interesting because microbiome has been around for a long time, but I think the attention that it's getting in relation to birth is very interesting. It's sort of people who maybe aren't that interested, in birth. This is what I love, have started to go, oh, right, so it does have an impact. So the microbiome impacts many other things, but it also is impacting, mother-baby hormones and those types of things. So they almost have fallen into it, or they can't ignore what's kind of right in front of their faces. So I find this very interesting. People that wouldn't ordinarily be talking about microbiome and birth have started to talk about it. And I think the consumer, again, I saw it on a commercial the other day, Sarah, for a product, and I thought this is really fascinating. Regular people, regular folks are talking about microbiome on the skin. And whereas you wouldn't have seen that, 10 years ago. So even the regular consumer, outside of talking about, birth and those types of things, are talking about microbiome, which is leading them, it's leading them down the trail that, that this is a whole part of the process. And when does microbiome start? Those types of things. So it's actually very, very good that it's sort of, trailed into the field that we work in. I don't know if that's something that, you're seeing in Australia, because I was going to ask you about what the climate is like there for you. Is it similar to what you see in other parts of the world? Is it more driven there? I mean, I know you're immersed in it, but of course, you probably have, watched what the consumer is doing there. So what type of feedback are you getting there as well?
Well, I think Australia is still very conservative. We have a high, well, it has been 1/3, now it's 1/4 of women give birth in the private system, which is really not very well regulated in terms of interventions. There's no incentive to have low rates of intervention in the private sector. But what's exciting in Australia and actually around the world really is the increasing evidence for the benefits, I should say, or the gold standard that is midwifery care. So we are actually seeing more midwifery models of care being rolled out. There's a bit of a blowback from the obstetricians who, because over here in Australia, as opposed to some other parts of the world, obstetricians can give care to healthy low-risk women. They're not just for high risk. So we have a lot of women going in private thinking they're getting the best care by going to an obstetrician, and they actually end up with much higher rates of intervention and not necessarily better outcomes. And so we have this increasing availability of midwifery care for low-risk healthy women who, better, safer, cheaper. Basically, it's a better model of care. It's safer. We know that there's better outcomes. There's actually lower risk of premature birth as well. If we were really serious about lowering the cesarean rate, lowering the prematurity rate, and we're beginning to be that midwifery care is becoming more available from within the public hospital system. So that's one of the changes. I think that's very heartening. But in relation to like conventional maternity care, I'm not seeing a lot of change happening. I know that, for example, a few years ago in the US, there's been a increase in awareness around the risks of, for example, synthetic oxytocin, which is one of our research interests, and more protocols, more research into what exactly happens, and as a consequence of that, as I understand it, there's really good guidelines, but we don't have that in a systematic way in Australia. There may be aspects, I'm sure there's places that do a better job of that, but there isn't really a big incentive to have like national guidelines around those things. So it's a little bit diverse, really, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's not dissimilar, in Canada, we hear in the US too, the facility, I mean, again, having that standard would be really good. We need more research. I mean, the bottom line is that's what's going to ultimately change people's perspective. I think that, it's interesting hearing you talk about, the climate of, midwifery care. We've got all sorts of things here as well in Canada with our midwives and our obstetricians and MDs, of course, delivering. So it's really interesting. I think the most valuable thing that I've seen change, and I don't know if this is with you as well, but the conversations have started, and sometimes there's been disagreements, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people, getting upset with each other, because I think that, our goals are similar. However, we just have to make sure that we're on the right track of, what that value of that goal is, So I don't know if that's something that you're seeing a lot more conversation, but we are seeing it here in Canada.
Yes, I think there is more conversation and more questions being asked, and I think that's really important. And at least we know that there's knowledge gaps there, so that's really important that we're at that point. But of course, it's a little disheartening sometimes because we realize there's so much that we don't know, and so much of what we're doing, we don't know what the long-term consequences are, and we haven't also, like with the microbiome, we haven't actually figured out how to fill in that microbiome gap. For when cesareans are really needed. So there's a lot of, as you say, a lot of research to do. But like you, I'm really heartened by the fact that women are voting with their feet. They're voting for models of care that prioritize physiological birth. They're reading things on the internet. I mean, it's like the internet it's got its pros and cons, but it is really the democratization of knowledge. So you can go online and read some of this research yourself without having to go through a care provider. So I think that's an exciting aspect of it, and women are becoming more educated. There's the ability for women to become more educated, and also there's also organisations that are being the medium for getting more complex information out to women. So I think that's exciting as well.
Yeah, very exciting. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I mean, I know you and we could go at this all day.
We could talk all day, couldn't we?
I feel it's happening already, So for people listening in, I'll just tell you, we're like a week out from this event, and I'm so excited. I'm bursting with energy right now. It's evening time for me. I came online thinking, oh, this is a little late in the evening, and now I just want to, hop on a plane and get to Sarah's kitchen, because I said that's what it's going to be like today. We're just going to be sitting in your kitchen having a cup of tea. So yeah, it's just fantastic. Sarah, thank you so much. This has just been brilliant. I can't wait to have you online for the full event. It's going to be 75 minutes. You know that, right, Sarah? 75
yes,
minutes. 75 minutes of Dr. Sarah Buckley, actually twice in one day, plus bonus, we will be having a live Q&A, which means that it won't just be my questions, it will be all of your questions. Both Kristen and I are going to be hosting, of course, with our Gold team here, and we're very, very excited to kick off this great event at Gold Perinatal. So join us live online on October 1st. Now listen, if you can't come for the live event, it's okay. All you need to do is go online and reserve your seat. You'll be able to listen to the recording, and and that is going to be of great value to all of you as well listening in. So anyways, thank you so much. I'm just smiling from ear to ear, Sarah. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Fiona. Lovely.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, look forward.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, everyone, for listening. Again, lots of our speakers and presenters are online. You can find them all on our YouTube channel. We've got a fabulous lineup coming up for our Gold Perinatal Conference, so do join us for that live, of course, with Dr. Sarah Buckley on October 1st. But for now, I'll sign off and say thanks to everyone for listening and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye for now, everyone.